blog and Rome Vaharo's blog. He's the other guy who's been making a lot of trouble about this. Rome Vaharo built an entire website called Wikipedia, We Have a Problem, that has 35,000 words of bullshit.
All right, so this is Rome Vaharo again. And this video, I'm primarily talking about Tim Farley. Tim Farley is another person of interest to Wikipedia. We Have a Problem. So I focused on different types of pushback and harassment and targeting that I've received. One, there's Oliver and his brother, which is very, very extreme, sociopathic, and just straight out bizarre. There's Rational Wiki, which allows these people to do things like this and supports them. And then there's Tim Farley. Tim Farley is unique. Tim Farley is a somewhat prominent research fellow or former research fellow for the James Randi Educational Foundation. He's a very prominent social influencer in the skeptical activist community. And I discovered that he was acting like a propagandist for activity that was occurring on Wikipedia.
Wheeler and Vaharo have clearly said on their blog that they were asked to edit Sheldrake's article by Sheldrake, which is against the rules.
Yeah.
And I think what Tim does is the worst, because one of the things that Tim Farley does is literally misrepresent sometimes how Wikipedia even works, period. But he misrepresents activities happening on Wikipedia that are potentially exposing skeptic activism on Wikipedia for doing some pretty crappy things. And so I'm going to show you one example of how I discovered Tim Farley's deeper involvement in these matters.
We've talked about it on the show before. I've talked about Deepak Chopra. I've talked about Rupert Sheldrake. There seems to be this kind of thing that flares up every once in a while amongst paranormalists and psi people that's Wikipedia's out to get them, and the guerrilla skeptics are out to get them on Wikipedia, and we're beating them down and harassing them and doing all these terrible things. And it's nonsense, and it's trumped up nonsense.
I'm just going to stop the video right there to, one, highlight Tim Farley's persuasion. So he does use persuasion as if this was politics. Notice how he discredits the message of harassment happening on Wikipedia as linking it to, woo claims again, right? And he's mistaken. I am not a person who's involved. What did he call it? Paranormalists. Or I'm not involved with any paranormal group. To be honest, it's not a subject matter that I have even found that interesting. And if I did, there's nothing wrong with that. And so this is the first thing that Tim does, is kind of use a little persuasion, and he dismisses it, of course, as nonsense, non-existent. So let's hear how Tim explains how he, as a skeptic, came to that conclusion.
Nonsense. The problem is that trying to explain how it's nonsense when you get into all the discussions that go on is extremely painful, because the discussions are endless, right? There's a lot of talking that goes on Wikipedia. There's a lot of, it's basically like a giant committee meeting all the time trying to figure out, okay, you want to put this in the article, I want to put this in the article, let's figure out a compromise position. And so there's a lot of discussions that just go on and on and on, and it's in those discussions that this supposed skeptic cabal is holding everyone down.
So on the one hand, what Tim is saying is absolutely true. The harassment, when people are complaining about harassment from editors on Wikipedia, it is through the consensus process, which is one thing and one thing only: it's discussing. And you see how extensive this is. This is Rupert Sheldrake's discussion consensus page when I was active. So you see how massive and extensive this is. And it really is. It's a labyrinth, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of detail negotiating a consensus on Wikipedia. The other thing that Tim doesn't really talk about much is that when people talk about harassment on Wikipedia, they are not necessarily talking about harassment like we would complain about online. Let's say if we're on Facebook or whatever. On Wikipedia, Wikipedia has its own guidelines for what is considered harassment on Wikipedia. So it doesn't mean, I'm not a snowflake. I'm not like crippled because someone called me a pseudoscience promoter on Wikipedia. That's not what bothers me. What bothers me is that Wikipedia has a fundamental principle, which is called assuming good faith. And assuming good faith means that when you confront people on Wikipedia who are coming from a different perspective of you in an edit, that you don't assume anything bad about them. You don't assume that they're there to maliciously disrupt the encyclopedia. You don't assume that they're an idiot because they have a different viewpoint of you. This assuming of good faith is essential to consensus building on Wikipedia.
I've been promising to write a follow-up for a long time, but I was struggling with how do I turn it into something that's readable and isn't just, well, he said this, and then this guy said this, and look, this guy said, and it gets into interpreting words.
How do you do it in that voice?
Yeah, exactly. And the discussions all have to be in comic.
Is there a hashtag for that?
So, it's just, it turns into one of those, what they call a fisking, where you have, oh, he said this sentence, and then, okay, I rebut it, and he says this sentence, and I rebut it, and I find that stuff intolerable.
All right, so Tim is basically saying that the complexity of a talk page on an article, it's too complex and it's way too difficult to show how harassment happens. And this is actually so not true. One does not need to go through a labyrinth at all to at least show about the harassment that I'm talking about. Specifically on Wikipedia, we have a problem. So let me just show you about one thing that happened to me within my first 3 days. This is before any of the real drama even began. When I arrived on Wikipedia, Wikipedia editor Vizak, who is now Wikipedia editor Manul, published my real name, doxed me, published my name on Rupert Sheldrake's talk page. Now, no one can say that that is not in violation of Wikipedia's policy. Let's look at a few different Wikipedia policies. Wikipedia has very strong guidelines about user behavior on Wikipedia. This is what people are talking about, right? When we're saying, hey, groups of these editors, they are engaging in editor suppression, it means that they are engaging in tactics that Wikipedia already has guidelines against. For example, Wikipedia, please do not bite the newcomers, okay? Now, when I was a newcomer, this is what happened to me my first 3 days. So Wikipedia has policies against this, okay? Posting of personal information. Posting another editor's personal information is harassment unless that person has voluntarily posted his or her own information and links to such information on Wikipedia. So claims of harassment against this group of editors on Wikipedia is not the same thing as claiming people are harassing someone on the internet. They're saying, hey, Wikipedia has a set of guidelines for building a consensus. And this group of editors is not only just violating those guidelines, it is abusing them.
Essentially, I went into the Rupert Sheldrake page and I did these charts for 14 of the people who've been battling on the Rupert Sheldrake page. I picked 7 skeptics and 7 of the pro-paranormal people, and I tried to pick the most prominent people who were getting into all the arguments. Right. So I was playing around with stats on editors, and I thought, well, I wonder if you looked at skeptic editors versus the pro-Sheldrake editors, if you'd see an obvious difference in them.
I'm going to stop Tim again. So I just want to explain what he's doing. So notice, again, using persuasion, Tim has now repivoted away from actually looking at the only set of information where one can determine if there's a problem, which is the actual consensus building process itself. And now he's repivoting our attention away from that onto this data set.
What it turned out was the 7 skeptical editors, the ones that are getting yelled at by the paranormalists on Sheldrake's page, were 55% articles and 45% talk, right? Pretty good ratio, right? More than half of what they're doing is actual stuff that goes into the encyclopedia. When you go into the pro Sheldrake articles, 31% actual article stuff. 68%, more than 2/3 of what they do is talk and argue with people.
All right, so stop. We're going to go right back to Tim Farley's persuasion here. So Tim's argument, basically using his data sets, is that skeptical editors were genuine contributors to Wikipedia. If you look at the data, you see them. They're the ones who are doing all the work. And the pro-Sheldrake editors were only contributing in a very insignificant way. That is making an argument that it's therefore okay to harass people on Wikipedia and even abuse Wikipedia's policies because you're the ones actually editing a lot of articles. That's what that argument is saying. But besides that, Tim's data was fudged. And Tim is lying because he took two editors that were making these same or very similar arguments as all of these people, specifically complaining in many of the cases about the skeptic editors, and he just dumped them in this data set. And he was able to, and these were high contributors to Wikipedia too. So he was able to take their high performances and fluff them up into the skeptic chart. On top of that, this editor, Vizak, now editor Renewal, has basically runs a script, has like a bot. And because they're able to run a bot, I'm not sure exactly how this happens, but because they can run a script or a bot, that bot is making changes to Wikipedia's articles programmatically, and they're getting the credit. So even Vizak's numbers are kind of souped up because they have an action that's being made by a script, not a human. So this is where I really saw how Tim Farley is a propagandist. Now, I would not have known that Tim Farley was involved with any of this at all, if he didn't actually reveal what he was doing behind the scenes. So this happened to me on Wikipedia in 2013. And in 2013, Susan Gerbic posted my blog, Wikipedia, We Have a Problem, on Facebook, and Tim Farley replied. And I think this reply says everything that anyone needs to know. So let me read you his quote. Tim Farley, although I did not reply to the guy, I don't recommend it. He is clearly a troll and simply out for attention. His current effort is, in part, aimed at fixing his own personal reputation in the Google results, where a very snarky and critical article about him is the #1 result for his name. This is the Rational Wiki article. He then goes on to literally get Susan to participate with him in downranking my rebuttals and increasing the Google ranking of the Rational Wiki article. Specifically, Tim Farley was behind in promoting that I was a social media strategist known for trolling the internet to support pseudoscience and spread conspiracy theories. So my claims of harassment and everything I've just exposed so far is nothing but a conspiracy theory. Rational Wiki even uses Tim Farley's quote about me being a troll to establish the reference that is what I am, a troll. And Tim calls me a troll. He says, it says, it is clear to me, if only from his extreme verbosity, that this guy is just a troll, trying to soak up everyone's time as possible. So all of this on Rational Wiki, that has been an intentional campaign to destroy someone's reputation. According to Tim Farley, I deserve it because I'm verbose. Now, Tim Farley should know better. Tim Farley claims to battle online misinformation. He's a skeptic. So skeptics have a responsibility that when they set a high standard for information and when they set a high standard for knowledge and education, that they better make sure that they're living up to those standards and not abusing that standard to harass someone. And the fact of the reality is that the harassment I received on Rational Wiki, it's used not just to damage my reputation, but to protect the reputation of Tim Farley, because Tim Farley was exposed for being involved with things that are not really consistent with how Tim presents himself online. So, for the benefit of protecting Tim's own reputation, one of the main reasons why I personally believe that this has been allowed to happen on Rational Wiki is because so many prominent people have dug in and invested themselves and their reputations on the fact that this is just a conspiracy theory. So much so that now, here's the irony. There's a lot of irony in these stories. Here's the irony. Now, when Tim is on Wikipedia, Tim Farley claims that he is the one being harassed by me, and Wikipedia, we have a problem. This sounds so petty. I mean, I feel ridiculous that I have to go on the internet 4 years later and make videos talking about a petty editorial squabble. This is ridiculous, but I am on the defensive mode. It is ridiculous for me to have to deal with all of this for the past 4 years because of a petty squabble on Wikipedia and someone damaging someone's reputation and trying to cover up their tracks.